Hello, everyone. Welcome. Greetings to our global audience. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever it is, depending on where in the world you're watching or listening to us from. If you've come here via YouTube and want to know a little bit more about what we do, just head on over to officehours.global. That's our primary web portal for more information and links about the show. Note, you can use the QR code, which is sitting, I think, down over here. There it is, right next to me. You can also look at that little link at the top of it, the askofficehours.global. Just type that into any URL. It'll get you into our Q&A system, so you can ask questions. Questions drive our show every day, so please do that. If you're in the Mukana system today, you're going to get a special treat. Get your headphones ready so that you're going to be able to appreciate the second hour. We're doing it on dynamics. And in the meantime, we're going to try a little what they call a reverse Q&A with you. If you use the third tag in Mukana, and those of you who have been in the system before, you know there are tags that you can put next to your question when you ask your questions. Instead of the two that we normally do, one for the general questions and one for the second hour, we have a third one today, describe dynamics. And we're going to ask you to answer one of those questions in 15 words or less. How would you describe dynamics? How do you plan for dynamics when you mix things? So we're going to have a little two-way in the second hour. Should be fun to do. That's all coming up after we finish our first hour, and that is where we're headed right now. Mitch, what's our first question?
Thanks, Bill. First in is Peter Moore from Auckland, New Zealand, asking, more of a PSA. I installed Sonoma on my unsupported Mac through OpenCore boot. As I'm enrolled in the Apple Developer Program, why not? I did back it up, though, and I'm expected on this with macOS on qemu. I'm not sure what that is. qemu on Linux. Don't do this.
Interesting. Jeff, do you understand? Did you parse that through, and can you give him some help?
Help? No. I can give him some sympathy. I thank him for the great thing of don't do this, but boy, when I see those words, I did not back it up, though. So Peter, I think, is calling out to the world as his PSA today is not don't do this. It's have you remembered to back up? Have you checked your backups? Do you have things backed up in multiple places?
I think he said he did back up.
Oh, he did back it up. Okay. Well, I misread. But anyway, a great PSA for every single day. Remember to back up.
Yeah, I don't think there's a more important message to anybody who's dealing with computers, which are normally very reliable, but can be fragile. Mickey, what do you think?
Yeah, with any sort of build or setup that is not officially supported by the OS or the software that you're using or the tools that you're using in general, only do it in a dev machine or an R&D machine. Do not deploy this in your actual production day-to-day use machines.
Yeah, that's always, I think, wise advice. Let's sneak on to our next question.
Sneaking away with TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My main Mac, which runs Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Remote Desktop, Audio Hijack, Loopback, Lightroom, Photoshop, and Unity Comms all day, every day, is still running macOS 13, otherwise known as Ventura. Is it safe to update to macOS 14 Sonoma yet, or should I stay put?
Mickey, start us off, and then Jeff will help us out.
Yeah, TJ and I have discussed these sort of topics in detail over the past couple of years. But my take is, if you do not need any feature in Sonoma that in order for you to get your job done, then if your current machine or installation is operational, it works well, then there is no need to update. If only update if you need something in the new OS. And going back to what I mentioned in the previous question, I always install and thoroughly test new OSs and versions of software on R&D machines before deploying them into production. That way I can assure zero downtime, because in an industry where the deadline was always yesterday, I need machines that work. I need machines that are essentially appliances. Just get the job done.
They're giving you deadlines of yesterday? Mine are 3 days ago. That's terrible. Jeff.
And I'll throw one additional piece in there, which is to check with the vendors of any software that you use that is mission critical to what you use. And especially when we're talking about a major OS update, invariably, if you can check the change log of the versions, you want to see somewhere along the way, preferably not just last week, added support for, in this case, Sonoma. If they just added it last week, probably not reliable yet. If they added it a few months ago when they should have been working on it, when it was even first released to developers, and they've had a few generations of updates on their end, and all the software you want will work on that newer OS, then okay. I always like to wait to a 0.1. So for instance, I did that 14.1. In fact, I waited a little bit longer. And interesting story, that doesn't mean they won't break something in a point release. So 14 would have worked fine, for instance, for all my setup after the software worked. 14.1 added a fair bit of additional security restrictions to software developers, and some of them didn't react. So for example, it broke some things in OBS, which I'm now dealing with, and unexpected. And that didn't happen in 14, happened in 14.1. So as Mickey said, that's the bottom line, is test anything on another machine, a test machine, before you put it into production.
Mitchell.
I agree with Mickey. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's generally a good generalized advice to give. And the other general advice is don't ever upgrade anything in the middle of a project, because then you're really hanging it out there.
Mickey?
Yeah, just to add to what Jeff was mentioning earlier, don't just wait don't simply rely on waiting on a point upgrade release and also reading forums. Test your specific setups. For example, since we're in audio day, test a version of an audio plugin that you're using with your specific version of the DAW, running on your specific version of the OS, running on your specific hardware. It's not just a single element that you need to test. You need to test the entire combination of the system that you're running.
Wise advice. Jeff, final up.
I'll just add one other thing where I'll disagree with folks a little bit, which is this concept of need. Sometimes you don't know what you need until you have it. And there is a difference between what do you need and what could you benefit from. So, Steve Gibson, very famously in Security Now, I don't know, I think he's maybe now in Windows 7, right? He was on that Windows XP until 2 years ago, because it had what he needed. So there's always some features that fall into that category of, wow, that I could benefit from them. Maybe that will make something more convenient. Maybe it'll make something a little easier. And that's valuable also, but you must weigh them and test them against what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's all perfectly fair. I will say there's a difference, too, between what's your orientation. Are you an experimentalist? Do you need to live out on the edge because you help other people with their problems? So if you're going to be doing troubleshooting for folks on a new OS or something like that, you better get on it pretty soon and discover the problems for yourself. On the other hand, if you're mission-critical part of a production change and everybody's relying on you to get your work done, I think Mickey's approach, which is triple check every time so that when you need to do your work, you can get it done. That's the most important attribute. Mickey, you wanted to follow up again a little bit?
Yeah, just a last point, and going back to what Jeff mentioned about looking at what new tools may benefit you. That's why I keep R&D machines, where if I hear of something new and I want to test it out, I run it on those machines, so that does not affect my productions.
Yeah, that makes good sense. All right, we've been on this a little bit. Next question.
Next one in from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. Peter asked, Behringer released this on my wish list. What are your thoughts?
It looks like Jeff Francis has a little bit of a thought. Jeff?
A little bit of a thought. This is the Behringer UBXA, which is their recreation of the Oberheim OBXA, which is kind of quintessential 1980s synth. There's a lovely picture of Geddy Lee from Rush in front of that. So Rush, Van Halen, The Police, all those kind of sounds from the 80s. Oberheim just did their own release of this through Sequential in May. So I would think theirs is actually the faithful recreation, whereas Behringer has done in the past, is reverse engineering things. And I believe the original developer of the voltage-controlled oscillators of this spoke out against this when Behringer first announced it. Doesn't mean it might not be a great synth, and probably a lot less expensive than the sequential version, but there you have it.
Wow, that really helped me understand the process. So thank you, Jeff. Let's move to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Many inside and outside of the technical community talk about generative AI as the next disruptive technology, but two of the leading LLMs, GPT-4 and Claude, still have usage caps. Do you think we'll ever see LLMs available that aren't capped?
Thankfully, our favorite pundit about AI, John Preto, is here. John, tell us.
I wish this question was asked tomorrow, because tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of ChatGPT. And remember, ChatGPT was an application. GPT-3 had been out 2 years prior to that, in which people had access to the API and were using that access to ChatGPT-3 for 2 years prior to ChatGPT, the application, coming out. And so what's going to happen here, Douglas, is that the actual back-end models are going to go big into the cloud. Everybody's going to have access to that. And then the client side, you're going to see it embedded everywhere. So Windows is integrated into the OS, and you're going to see it integrated into every application that you use, and then you'll have it integrated into application on the phone. So on a usability, it's going to grow. The reason why it's locked now is because OpenAI didn't see much traction in the last 2 years prior to them launching GPT. With that amount of success, they had to throttle it. And so once they get through that, they'll be able to change those dials. And then the integration of that elsewhere, it's going to be much easier to access the models in a hybrid architecture.
Thank you for that. Jeff, Cohen.
The short answer is yes. I mean, we see that with anything that is rare and scarce at first. And I mean, we had cell phone limit, number of minutes you could talk, and internet was the same thing. Now we have unlimited internet, we have unlimited calling on most cell phone plans. So sure, the business model has to support it. And for example, what Bing is doing with GPT is pretty interesting. I don't, maybe John knows. I don't believe there's a limit in terms of if you're using it through Bing, their implementation of GPT. I don't believe there's limits for what it does. Now, it does some things differently than what ChatGPT does. And, ChatGPT, of course, is in the process now, not like anything interesting is going on. I'm sorry, OpenAI, not like anything interesting is going on at the company there. But that is that battle between that initial concept of a not-for-profit and then realizing, hey, this not-for-profit is costing us like $8 gajillion a day in terms of infrastructure. So yeah, it's rough. So that's, there's some turmoil and battle around that. But once these business models are figured out, and Bing, of course, has advertising, yeah.
It's such an interesting thing now. I'm trying to wrap my head constantly around all these changes, and thankfully I am so grateful for office hours and the people that I know here, some of whom we just heard from, about trying to keep up with this. I'm curious. This is just a little thing in the back of my mind, whether I'm thinking of a concept called information homogenization that I was just dreaming about the other day. Are these large language models which get fed by everybody, but fed things that are already known as opposed to things that are wildly outside the norm? And I wonder how that's going to affect things over the course of long periods of time. And I have no answer at all. But those are the best questions, the one you can ponder and not come up with an answer, because an answer at this point, I think, is unknowable. Jeff, what are your thoughts here before we leave?
And I'll throw out one other thing, which is I highly encourage folks, if you haven't, to play with Bard, Google Bard. Again, also don't think there's limits with that. And, I constantly test and run things through ChatGPT and Bard, and it really is a game of hit or miss. On one thing, one will do extremely well, and then vice versa. And so I often try them and get differing results. Some better than others on both. And I don't believe there's any any limits there.
Interesting. Well, we'll certainly be talking about this here on Office Hours. We encourage your questions about this leading edge of how these large language models and how things like ChatGPT affect every aspect of not just our working lives, but I think our lives in general. It's getting folded into so many technologies rely on that the next few years are going to be fascinating to see how it develops. Let's head on to the next question.
From Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida, Logitech is starting to include webcams, lights, etc. into their Sync global device management system via local Logi Tune app. What are your thoughts?
Jeff Cohen.
Man, you got me worked up just seeing the question. You could call them strong feelings about this. I think it's abhorrent what Logitech has done with their software. I've used and loved Logitech products for a very long time, and I do like the hardware products. Their software has become so invasive and so intrusive that I've actually communicated with them and told them that their software is now malware, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it wants to integrate with your calendar. I don't need my mouse control software to integrate with my calendar. I don't want it trying to do that either. And they've made it intentionally difficult to separate some of these things, to say, let me control the functionality of my mouse and don't run these other 30 processes in the background and bog down my computer and constantly try and phone home and, see how much I weigh today and all that stuff. So I am not a fan. For the record, I'm still running. I had to go find to make sure I could use older versions of the software before they started doing all this stuff, before, Scrooge McGoo started working there and told him to change anything. So, so I have some feelings about that.
It seems like it. The Internet of Things, good things or bad things? Mitchell, what do you think?
I agree with Jeff wholeheartedly. I don't like any software that does that. They want to take over your computer. I have a problem. Well, I know it's not part of the question, but it's the same issue with Norton. Trying to get it off my computer, it's like spam.
I see a future where your scale is going to berate you every morning. You're up 2 pounds. Stop it. Let's go to the next question.
And it's a QR code coming from Matthew in Oakland, currently sending video over SDI and HDMI to SDI converter, then SDI to an HDMI converter. Is there an updated or preferred way to handle long runs? Ethernet solution?
Let's start with Mickey here. Mickey?
Yeah, SDI either over copper, coax, or SDI over fiber is still by far the most common professional grade video transport used in production. If you want to look at the future and take a step up, there are the industry is currently moving towards audio and video over IP protocols. If you're looking for one that is truly uncompressed, you would want to study up on SMPTE 2110. If you're okay with utilizing compressed formats or protocols, there are protocols like NDI and also Dante AV that could be useful for you. Though, of course, with these new AV over IP protocols, you would need quite a significant investment in your IP network infrastructure.
Jeff Francis.
So Mickey got two of the ones I was going to talk about. The third, you need to be careful when you ask an Ethernet solution because people refer to twisted pair wiring, Cat5, Cat6, Cat5e, as Ethernet sometimes. And so there's a difference of whether you're talking about networked video, which is the NDI and the Dante AV and also AVB, and using just twisted four twisted pair cabling as an extension. So there are things that take an HDMI and convert to using Cat5 or Cat5e cable to extend these. These are the cheaper solution, not what Mickey was talking about with a fully networked system. So when you say Ethernet, there are a cabling system, and then there is a networked system. So be sure you're understanding which you're talking about. The cabling is a one-to-one camera to destination. So it's an HDMI in, it converts it to a cable. You have a long, cheap cable in between, and then you convert back to HDMI at the other end. Sort of a less expensive and less distance version of the fiber extension. And then going to fully networked, the video is networked, and you need network switches, and you need to be a network engineer, at least somewhat.
Excellent, Matthew. Hope that helped. Don't forget, this show is run by your questions, and you drive the topics, and through your votes, if you're voting in the regular Mocana system, you drive the priority of those questions. Also, don't forget, in our second hour today, we're going to be doing something a little bit new. For those of you who are putting your questions in the Mocana system, normally you have a couple of tags, the regular general questions and the second hour questions. Today, we've added a third category. Actually, we have 4 up there now that I'm looking at. There's the general questions for the main show, but then we have describe dynamics and an untagged question area. So take a look through those and decide where your questions go. If you tag your questions when you put them in, it's important, and it's particularly important today, particularly that describe dynamics question, as Marty told us before the show. We're going to be doing a little back and forth, something new for the second hour in audio today. So please participate in that. And your questions in the Describe Dynamics tag will be part of what we do in our second hour in this experiment. So that's the kind of ad. Now it's time to sneak to our next question.
Sneaking away with Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach, Florida, and residing here on our panel. What's currently the best De-Reverb plugin for dealing with dialogue recorded in poorly treated rooms? I find iZotope RX to be fairly destructive by the time you tame a fair bit of reverb.
So we got a lot of opinions on here. I'm going to let Mitchell go first, then Mickey, then Jeff. Mitchell.
Yeah, I've used iZotope a bunch of times. It works wonders, but it can't completely do miracles. I've worked also with the plugin available in Adobe Audition and the one that's resident in Premiere. It's a heavy lift for a system to determine what is the room tone and what is the reverb and repeating reverb sounds that accompany a reverb sound. The best advice I can give is just use it very sparingly. You're not going to eliminate it, but you're going to reduce it.
I'd say that's the second best advice after mic it correctly and treat your rooms properly. Anyway, Mickey, sometimes you can't. Mickey?
Yeah, I'm assuming that you're trying to clean up dialogue as opposed to other elements such as musical elements or sound effects. There are multiple tools that I use. Each one results in gives different results, so I try each one. Generally speaking, Synaptic Unveil has delivered pretty natural results for me on dialogue, but specifically on for treating early reflections. SPL's De-Reverb has been pretty good for me on early reflections, not so much on reverb tails, but like say in a small room with hard surfaces, which cause a lot of early reflections. SPL De-Reverb is my go-to, and to an extent, Accentize DX Revive has also been good at taming some reverb.
There you go, Jeff Cohen.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm curious if anyone has tried Clarity. I don't know if it's VX, but Clarity, Waves Clarity De-Reverb, which is fairly new. I will tell you, because some of the new AI-based tools, like, for example, Descript. Now, there's no granularity, so Descript has this audio processing they just call Studio Sound, which just does everything. You can't, separate out and fine-tune reverb versus noise. But I will tell you, I mean, and Mitch, they do perform miracles. It is uncanny. Again, the problem is there's no granularity to the settings yet. Maybe we'll get it. But, I think there's a difference. Like iZotope, for example, you can let it learn that sound and determine the best settings, but then those settings will be applied uniformly throughout the entire recording. Whereas something like that, Adobe also has their new, it's part of their upcoming podcast editor, but it's also a separate tool right now with some caps. They do the same thing, where it seems like they are dynamically changing. They're analyzing the entire thing, and it is remarkable what they do, and then still keep some of the more of the quality and fidelity of what you're trying to fix. So I'm optimistic about the future, at least.
Mickey, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just want to add as well that I mentioned a couple of tools earlier, and I use each tool very lightly, and I often get much better results by doing multiple passes, multiple light passes as opposed to one very heavy one, and use each tool to specifically target a problem. Like I'll use, as I mentioned earlier, exp'd De-Reverb to tame the early reflections, and for the reverb tails, I'll go use Synaptic for that. Light passes as opposed to heavy pass, multiple light passes instead of a single heavy pass.
Mitchell.
I like that advice. I think that makes a lot of sense because some of these plugins, if you use them incorrectly, will add more subtleties and problems than you're trying to get rid of in the first place. I'm very enthused about what might happen with AI because now we're talking about a completely different genre of cleaning things up.
Yeah, I'm also reminded, is particularly when you're at the beginning of this stuff, I know I made the mistake a lot in my early career of doing a bunch of changes and then not realizing that when I threw a general compression on the whole thing at the end, I would get some unintended things because I had notched out certain things early, and then I'm compressing the results of that changed sound, and suddenly it would get harsher or less listenable than I had intended. Even though it didn't sound like that as I was proceeding, by the time I got everything in place, it was not working as well as I should have. I guess it's kind of like maybe starting with a salty meat and then adding more salt because the recipe called for it. It's like, no, I should have been smart enough to say it already had enough of that. Let's not use just my normal add 2 tablespoons of salt to this thing that I'm cooking. So anyway, it's complicated. That's why audio is such a fascinating part of our industry. There's so much subtlety in doing it correctly, and I applaud everybody on the panel here who spent a large part of our panel here has spent their entire lives learning this stuff and are willing to share their expertise. So thank you guys. Let's move on to the next question.
Here's David Brady from New York, asking, Sonoma breaks virtual cameras that don't conform to Apple's modern systems extension, including NDI Virtual Camera. How many have rolled things back?
Let's start with John Preto. John.
So Chris Vanwick just talked about this, and Jeff Cohen just mentioned this. 14.11 broke some virtual camera extensions, especially in OBS. Chris has a command line patch to bring this back online, so I don't think it's a big deal.
Good. So if you're specifically affected by this, at least there's a place you can go to get some relief. Jeff Cohen, what do you think?
Yeah, John nailed it. That is precisely the problem I was referring to previously. So you're not alone. It also broke the same driver for OBS. And I landed yesterday after I found that problem on the same exact article, and will be trying that very fix today, and we'll see if I ever end up back on the show again.
We'll look forward to seeing you. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Let's move into the next question.
Gabriel Ung from Malaysia asks, hey, check 1, 2 are common phrases during mic sound checks for events. What are sound engineers listening for when using those phrases, and what are other methods the panelists use for sound checks? Thanks.
Jeff Francis, start us out.
Oh, there's so many jokes about how sound engineers can't count to 3. Check 1, 2. I suppose check has a really nice transient which gives you a burst of high frequencies. Personally, I can't stand listening to that, and I try to train all my students to have something to say when they walk up to a microphone. Two of my personal favorites in my arsenal is the preamble to the Constitution, because I grew up with Schoolhouse Rock, so I don't sing it, but I can do We the People. And then the other is Listen, my children, you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. Right?
Nice.
Longfellow.
Marty.
1 hen, 2 ducks, 3 squawking geese, 4 Corpus porpoises, 5, and it goes on to 10. What we're listening for multiple things. We're listening for level, we're listening for lack of distortion, we're listening for intelligibility, which is all tied up in consonants and transients. And
I think it's also a sobriety test if you make them say Corpus porpoises. You can't say that if you're under any influences. Anyway, I'm sorry I stepped on you, Marty. Did you finish up your comment?
Oh, well, it's tied to multiple things. So we're looking for volume, we're looking for lack of distortion, we're looking for intelligibility, which is tied up in consonants and transients. And we're looking for a lack of resonances. So whether we're typically talking about a live situation in front of a PA system. And so we're looking for all of those things.
Jeff Cohen.
I'll just add that I'm not particularly a fan of any kind of memorized dialogue because as you heard, of course, subconsciously, even from Jeff, the way he recited that is very different than the way he just speaks normally. The cadence is different. The consistency there's more consistency in that than there would be just in normal speech. So I think, of course, whatever it is. Now, if someone's going to be singing and you go up there and recite poetry, it's not a great mic check. So of course you need to do what the person will be doing in front of the microphone. And I think just natural dialogue, ask someone a question and let them answer you into the mic, whatever it is, you want to really try and recreate what you're about to capture or attempt to in the live performance.
Mitchell?
I'd like to add 2 more checks. Sibilance, which can be a problem. It can splatter and sound horrible on a big sound system. And if you're on the edge of feedback, feedback is a problem that's going to come up at some point during the performance. So checking both of those things are also important.
Yeah, a lot of good advice here. I sometimes just say, tell me what you had for lunch yesterday to get that conversational thing going. Next question.
Next question from Andy Kokendorfer in Ventura, Florida. Opinions on the Waveform Free DAW.
Ooh, this should be interesting. Jeff Francis.
So haven't used it. So here I am giving opinions about something I haven't used, but that happens every day. I've used earlier Traction products. Their earlier, I can't remember the name of it, but they had a previous free DAW. What I find these incredibly useful for is very simple situations. Waves used to have a thing called Tracks Live that was a multi-channel recorder, and it was incredibly dumb. I wouldn't call it a DAW. It literally had faders and pans and mutes, but it would track multiple channels on a older computer without problem. And so it was a thing that you would hook up to PA system and track, like from Dante or something. And you could use it to do virtual sound checks because it would do playback through the same number of channels as the recording came in. So I can see Traction being useful for those sorts of things. They do sell you lots of add-ons to make this into a more fully featured DAW. But for people getting started, for people who have small needs, I think this is a great option.
So it's a DAW without the display of any waveforms? How do you tell where you are?
No, it's not waveform. It's not waveform. It's not free of waveforms. The DAW's name is Waveform. It's the Waveform DAW, and the price is free.
Okay.
And then you can add on packages. Like if you want video, it's $50 to add video to it. If you want to add greater music mixing tools, it's a $50 add-on for that.
Thank you. So, you unbroke my brain. What do you mean a DAW? I think
you've just discovered the problem with their naming.
I'm with Bill on that one.
Yeah. What?
Me too. I
Anyway,
didn't get it either.
Jeff.
I'll just give a little plug for the folks that just refuse to do any kind of promotion or anything else, which is Reaper. It's my preferred DAW. The functionality it seems to just be unlimited. The scripting, everything else you can do, but I think you might find that you can try it for free. Technically, there's no limits. They do rely a bit on the honor system there. And then the first license that you can purchase is $60, and then they differentiate that from a full commercial license. And so I would look at, what will you need? If you need to add on features that will get you up to, even that much, 50, you can do some light to moderate video editing actually in Reaper as well. But it comes with so much. You probably have all of the functionality you will need out of the box with native plugins. And by the way, it is extremely efficient on your machines. I mean, Reaper works faster on one of my old machines than virtually every other DAW on my modern M2. It's extremely light, extremely efficient, and there's tons of YouTubers that do music on Reaper. It blows my mind every day.
Yeah, the only hit I've ever taken on is just the complexity. It sometimes can be a little hard, and you have to do some serious
There's a learning curve.
Time with it, to get functional and good at it. But that's true of a lot of things. Let's get to the next question.
And it's QR code question time. Try saying that a few times. Larry Avery from San Dimas, California. Hi, everyone. What is the most efficient and effective way to learn Adobe Premiere Pro? For the most part, I'm a still photographer, but have access to this tool and have lots of raw footage I'd like to clean up and add some polish to. Thanks.
Mitchell, start us off.
Oh, you got me on the most efficient and most effective because I'm going to be judged on this, but I'll give you some suggestions that might be good and head you in the right direction. There is so much in Adobe, especially with Premiere. It's one of the oldest editing systems out there, pieces of software. I've gone from Avid to Media 100, back to Avid, and then to Premiere Pro. They've made substantial changes to it. What you can find if you load it, and you've got a fairly recent version of it, is at the top of the screen, there's different modes that the screen will assume, like editing mode, assembly mode. One of them is learning, and you're going to find an online tutorial that provides you with sample footage and things like that. So you get used to that A-B roll editing metaphor that we've grown up with the film industry for so long. And then if you go to YouTube, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of classes and explanations of what this does and what that does. To be honest with you, when I use Adobe Premiere, occasionally I'll forget because I'm getting older about how to do something. All you have to do is type in what particular I want to do what is it when you take two clips and you fade them together, whatever the name of that thing is.
Transition?
I'll just it's a transition, but it's a melding transition. But anyhow, it's easy. You just type it in, put Premiere Pro, whatever the transition is, and instantly you have somebody there that's going to explain to you how to do it. So I'd say that Premiere Pro has one of the most extensive background out there, especially on YouTube or on the internet if you need it.
John Petto.
See, Larry, this is a super tough question. I presume you're on Creative Cloud since you have access and you're a photographer. You're probably using Photoshop and Illustrator. And then it seems natural to use Premiere Pro. But man, I was a Premiere Pro user for years and years and years. I got tired of it crashing during renders. And then I moved over to Resolve. And so my tool of choice now for video editing is Resolve, and it's free. So I would for free go download Resolve and start kicking the tires over there as well as using Premiere Pro. I still use Premiere Pro for some things I get stuck in on Resolve, and I go back because I know how to do it in Adobe Premiere. So don't leave Blackmagic Resolve out of your little workflow here.
So yeah, the big three: Premiere, Resolve, and don't forget Final Cut. Those of us who love it because it's just so easy and efficient. Anyway, next question.
Håkan Forrest from Stockholm, Sweden asks, you have two sports commentators sitting close together with individual headsets with loud crowd noise. What is your favorite setup in terms of compressors and filters?
Mickey's going to start us off. Mickey?
Yeah, I would start with an expander on the input, and then in your effects rack, a popular processor that people use and is quite popular as well within broadcast facilities is the primary source expander. There is a digital version of it in Yamaha boards, and also Waves has a copy of it as well that I think they call primary source enhancer instead of expander. I believe there are copies of it within the Lavo desks as well.
Marty Adius.
So it's going to be highly dependent on the microphone that is being used. If you have a headset that is specifically designed for sports broadcasting, the microphone will have its frequency response tailored specifically for speech in that environment. And what it will do is it will apply a high pass filter to it to cut all the low end, and it will tailor the EQ curve that's coming into your mixer for speech in that environment. And then you'll be able to tailor from that. So some headset microphones are wideband. They're intended to be used for speech in a low noise environment, and others are intended to be used in a high noise environment like this. And we'll get into some of the examples that Mickey was just talking about later in the show in the second hour. But using an expander potentially with a filter in it in the key will reduce the noise between words and allow the EQ to take over and highlight the certain frequencies that are specific to intelligibility in voice.
Jeff,
and
go on.
Of course, you want to be able to control the crowd noise and the shouting, and so compression will be important to make sure that you don't overdrive your output.
There you go. Jeff, go on.
And exactly what I was going to talk about is, as we've mentioned before, first you start with the room. Okay, a stadium is less than ideal. Then you start with the mic. And so this one, if you guys can see my screen now.
The Coles.
This one, and I think also referred to this category as lip microphones, because that bar at the top, you literally press up against your lips. And if Marty or anyone else maybe has some more information about exactly how it does what it does, but it's phenomenal. I mean, when you hear the folks talking through this, I mean, it practically sounds like they're in a studio, and yet they're in a stadium. So you start there. And of course, the software, like we talked about before, that is the last step, because now we're trying to fix what didn't go right with the other stuff, the room and the mic.
Jeff Francis.
So the lip mic, the way it works is it actually has two diaphragms, and you're much closer to the one that is closer to your lips, and the other one is a little farther back, so your sound is quieter because of the inverse square law. Sound gets quieter as it goes across distance. So the level of your talking at the close mic is much louder than your level at the farther mic at the back of that little thing that you hold up to your lips. And the two mics are wired out of polarity, so they subtract from each other. Now, because your voice is loud in the front mic and quiet in the back mic, your voice does not get canceled. But all of the background noise is the same level in both of those mics, and those get canceled. So it's a very, very simple technique that uses two microphones wired, two diaphragms wired reverse polarity.
Hakan, I hope that helps. Good advice. Let's see. I also need to mention again, in our second hour today, we are going to be talking about audio and your questions specifically in dynamics. So there are 3 tags. If you have questions for the second hour, particularly for the thing we've been talking about to describe dynamics, make sure that your questions are tagged that way. We have room for a few more questions, although we have a robust group already, but make sure you get those tags on them so we know where they fit into the play of the show. Let's go to the next question.
And here comes one of those QR code questions from Teresa Sabin in Moorhaven. Does a gimbal or a stabilizer help reduce the weight of my iPhone 13 Pro in my hands?
Marty.
So while those devices float the camera so that they can absorb shock and movement and provide a steady picture, they don't defy gravity. Although, it would be interesting to see somebody attach a helium balloon to one of those things to make it lighter. But other than that, no. The weight of the camera and the weight of the gimbal or stabilizer will all be applied to however you're supporting it, in your hand, on your body, on a stick. What it does do, though, it provides you a more comfortable, more ergonomic way to hold that device. So instead of holding your camera like this, you're holding onto the base of the stabilizer in a more comfortable position. You can brace your elbow against your body if you need to. So it sort of reduces the strain that you have. But no, it will not reduce the weight.
Mickey?
Yeah, I would say, and just referencing your other question that's coming up, if your intention is to stabilize the your shot, having more weight there could actually help you. It gives you more mass, meaning it's there's more there's a lot more substance there for you to hold steady, and the same is true with like miniature cinema cameras, like the Blackmagic Pocket cinema cameras and the FX3s and the like. These small light cameras are quite more cumbersome to shoot steadily with because of their size and also weight.
So hopefully that helps, Teresa. Also, it's one of the things I've noticed. When I discovered I was going to do more handheld work, I started working out a little with dumbbells just to get my shoulders. Now, this is back in the area where cameras were pretty heavy and things like that. But I have found that just having more tone in my upper body does help me be more stable when I have to go handheld and shoot things. So it's just another possibility for you. The other thing is that the weight redistribution systems that usually have a vest or something like that. Now, these aren't usually used with phones, but you could. Moving it off of your arms entirely into something else that either has a triangular form to your chest or a Steadicam-like rig where they put a vest on and then connect the phone or whatever you're shooting with to that does move the weight off, and you can shoot for much longer periods of time when you're using your entire body as opposed to just your forearms to hold the camera up. So just some thoughts. Let's go to the next question.
Håkan Force from Stockholm, Sweden asks, what live production remote control options are there for the Sony FX6, if any?
Mitch Hill.
Well, first, Håkan, I'd like to compliment you since I'm the Sony fanboy here, compliment you on picking a great mid-range Sony cinema camera. It's a great camera, and there's lots of things that you can attach to it. As far as remote control, I'd have to ask more specific questions as to what type of remote control. Are you talking about focusing, pulling the iris, or anything else that has to be done with that? There are tons of hardware out there that can do that, some made by Sony, some made by others. And there's also software. The Sony remote app will run very well and do some of the basic stuff. But if you want to color grade your camera remotely, you need a very specific device for that. Best to go with Sony on that. And I would say that you're in pretty good shape with all of the various things. I'm going to also suggest one other piece of software that I find very helpful with my FX3 is Monitor Plus. You can see it as an app for your iPad, but it will also run on your M1 Mac if you have one. It's a very handy little device. It gives you a remote view, and if you got an iPad that you're walking around with and your DP is running the camera, as a producer or director, you got a chance to see what's on the camera and also make some adjustments if you need to.
Next question.
Next one coming in from Teresa Sabin in Moorhaven. My intention is to go record a stable-looking video on the go while not breaking the bank. Which do you prefer, a gimbal or a stabilizer? Please explain the differences and the different occasions you might prefer one over the other. Thanks.
Mickey's going to take a run at this. Mickey?
My suggestion is, if you're just getting into video, is to teach yourself and train yourself to be able to capture the most stable footage you can just with your hands without relying on any gimbals or stabilization platforms. Learn the muscle memory and the techniques needed to capture a steady video just on your own.
Oh, that's good advice. And in fact, when I was learning to move from shoulder-mounted cameras to regular phone cameras and things like that, the smaller ones, I started figuring out some things to do. One of them is that rather than holding it out front, I would keep my elbows on my body so that I had one point of kind of contact. I would also figure out where my hand should be around the actual camera. For two reasons. If I held it with my second finger and my thumb, I had my first finger to operate some of the controls. So, practice, learn these kind of things. Also, I would figure out that in some certain circumstances, if I can figure out how to add a little rigidity, like maybe if I really had trouble and I was on something moving, I would bring it up next to my face for just a short period of time to try to help get a third position of stability so that I was not out here with my hands being moved around. Just try things. One of the smartest things I ever did on my phone when I started to shoot a lot, particularly when I was learning to capture things that were breaking and happening fast, was to get used to where's my phone in my pocket? How do I pull it out? What are the 2 or 3 things I have to hit really quickly to hit record to get going? And I would drill on that until I got really quick at it. And I can't tell you the number of shots where I said, I want to shoot that. And I was so good at pulling it out and within maybe 2 or 3 seconds actually starting to film that I caught a lot more shots that I was missing before. So the more time you spend rehearsing with your tools, I think the better your results are going to be. Hopefully that helps. Good questions. Let's go on to the next one.
QR code question from Brett Below from Appleton, Wisconsin. The DJI RS3 and 3 Pro gimbal stabilizers were released in June of 2022. Does the panel have any guesses on when the next version will be unveiled? What features or changes would you like to see on the new model?
I don't think there's anybody on the panel who has any idea. It's pre-release things, unless there's officially some sort of roadmap to what they're going to release when. Most of these companies don't do it. They're publicly held in a lot of cases, although DJI is out of the Pacific Rim, and I don't know what their corporate circumstances are. But generally, any guesses we would have would be pure speculation. Definitely, if you hear the rumor, it'll hit you through one of your social feeds probably that there's a new one about to be released. Come back here because almost all the new technology that is pretty significant we discuss on the day it's released here. Even if we haven't had it in our hands, you can get some informed speculation by our panels of experts. So thanks for asking. Let's go to the next question.
Junior Grant from New York City with a question. Good day, Office Hours. Is any of the panelists familiar with the Tascam Series 208i preamps and its overall value as an audio interface for a home studio?
And Pierce, Jeff Francis has some information. Jeff.
And I'm not familiar with this particular Tascam device, but I have used the Tascam DM4800 and one of their portable recorders. So the DM4800 is an early digital mixer. At this point, it's probably 15 plus years old, and it's still running in one of our studios at the university. The preamps on there, it's a 24-channel. It's a 64-channel console, but 24 preamps, and the whole console I think was $6,000. So if you think about the amount of money that was spent on each of those preamps, it's very little per channel. So probably the money that Tascam put into it is probably, less than $3 in components per preamp. And they are fairly clean and they are fairly neutral sounding preamps. So they don't really convey their own color onto the sound. They do get noisy at the extremes, so pretty much you couldn't run a Shure SM7B without a cloud lifter on it. You would not get enough gain out of those particular ones. This preamp, this Tascam interface seems to have a little more gain than that. This one looks to have I think 64 dB of gain as near as I could tell. One of the things that I really liked about this interface is that if you look at the back, and let's see if I can zoom in there, this is 4 mic preamps, but then as you zoom in, you see that it has additional digital inputs in the form of ADAT light pipe, which can be 16 channels, or it could be 8 channels at 96 kilohertz. And something that you don't often see on smaller things is you actually have word clock. So word clock would allow you to synchronize additional devices. So this could expand with 2 additional 8-channel mic preamps that you would feed word clock into. This could expand into a 20-input interface, which is how they advertise it, as a 20-input interface. So this could definitely grow with your home studio. $500 is a lot for a sort of basic 4-input interface. You could get a Focusrite for less than that, but if you want to grow, this would not be a bad option. And I would put the Tascam preamps alongside, the Focusrite Scarlett and those categories of preamps.
Thank you for the question, Junior. Let's go to our next question.
Håkan Forrest from Stockholm, Sweden asks, any recommendations on budget-friendly mic preamps for 2 to 4 channels to bring 2 to 4 mics to line level for an NDI or Dante audio interface?
Mickey's going to help us out here. Mickey?
Yeah, there are a couple preamps, say from Universal Audio and from API. I believe the Universal Audio 4710 has 4 preamps there. These are studio quality preamps, and the 4710 has built-in A to D converters as well if you want to use those. Another option, if you're on a budget, perhaps look for secondhand sound devices 442 or 552. Those field mixers have direct outs, and they have the sound devices quality preamps that we're accustomed to. Actually, in my opinion, much better than you would find on the MixPre series or even the current 8 series. I love the preamps on the 442. There's also the RME, I think they call it the quad, the quad mic. Again, great preamps on those. If ever you mentioned you wanted separate the preamps that are separate from the Dante interface, but if you want something that's all in one, RedNet has some preamps that are Dante capable. R&D also has the D8, which is an 8-channel remotely controllable preamp that's has a built-in Dante interface as well.
Okay. Let's see. Maybe, I think I thought Jeff was going to weigh in on that, but it must not have been. So I'll just let you know that we are about to make our transition into the second hour here. A couple of notes for the show between now and then. Don't forget, tomorrow, let's see. Oh, no, second hour intro. That's right. Square's TV Application Lab is with Michael Forrest right after this show, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's part of our regular thing, and he's going to be talking about learning how to integrate Shoot Pro webcam, Video Pencil, and or Beat Sheet into your workflow from Square's TV. The Isadora Lab with L. Wilson Spiro is also happening tomorrow at 11 a.m. So that's Thursday. Thursday's show is about EVS playback and recording workflows. This has been a great series that we've had. We've got some really fabulous broadcast-oriented folks, and Robert Green is going to be here this week as an EVS operator, tape operation, and video editor working in broadcast cable television for almost 3 decades. He's going to dive into the various modern EVS playback and recording workflows, as well as a progression. He'll talk about the progression from tape to server-based playback systems. So if you're interested and how the big boys like NFL teams and things like that do this stuff. Tomorrow's your day. Friday, behind the scenes review of the Office Hours Virtual Studio. This is going to be exciting. We're ready once again to kind of lift the curtain on how Office Hours gets produced. So if you wonder how we create this show every single day, it should be fascinating. I know that it's one of the most popular things we do. A lot of people understand that this is an incredible heavy lift. What you're watching right now is the result of literally dozens upon dozens of people working behind the scenes quietly, some on the show, some in the back of the show, back of the house, so to speak, but others who literally work quietly to bring all the attributes of this show together so that we can put out something that looks as close to broadcast television as you get. So that's a discussion for tomorrow. That brings us up to the top of the hour in our transition. We'll be back in just a second. Welcome back to Office Hours, our second hour, and we are looking forward to today because we are talking dynamics. Specifically, as most of you know, Wednesday is kind of our audio-centric day, and today we want you to get your headphones ready because our audio experts, including Marty, Jeff, Andy, and others who are appearing on the panel today are going to be taking you on an appreciation tour of dynamics, what it means. And we're doing it a little bit unusually today. We're going to kind of do a reverse Q&A. If you're using the Mukana system, you will have seen a third tag up there. Dynamics Basics is one of the tags. Describe Dynamics is another one of the tags. And for Describe Dynamics, what we want you to do is a very short post in there for what your description of dynamics is. I think we want to compare and get your ideas. 15 words or less, how would you describe dynamics? And how do you plan for dynamics when you mix things? That intro taken care of, I'm going to turn first, I think, to Marty Adius and let you kind of set the scene for today. Marty, what are we going to be doing?
Well, thank you, Bill. I've been looking forward to this one because dynamics has such a wide range of applications and definitions, and it's often a very misunderstood aspect of audio production. And so I'm going to kick it off by reading some of the answers to those questions just to get us started here, because I wanted to hear from our producers what their perspective is on dynamics. And so I'm not going to read any names. I'm just going to read the answers. And the first one is the variance in loudness between the highest and lowest levels of a full performance. And that is the textbook definition of dynamics. Thank you for that one. The next one is my style was to run faders and learn the performance to anticipate the range. I was not a fan of compression, and the recordings often had a protective limiter. I did mostly live mixes for television. Very good. That certainly is important to know your audience and your medium and the content in order to determine what kind of dynamics to allow in the performance. The next one is multi-band compression is when you separate the bands into individual ranges for processing. Helpful for situations where heavy bass is busting holes in the high and mid-range. And yes, that's actually very true. There are different types of compression that we're going to get into, and that is an interesting answer because there are a few future shows that we have planned here for Audio Wednesday, including on January 10th, we're going to do an episode on multi-band processing in particular. And earlier than that, on December 20th, we're going to be doing an episode on audio scopes. And so there will be some metering that will show us what kind of dynamics we are using or including in the program. And on December 13th, we're going to do an X32 lab, in which case we're going to look at some of the controls in a little bit more depth than we're going to do today to see how to control dynamics. So Another answer was ever changing. And yes, that is kind of the nature of dynamics. It's a very dynamic thing. Audio is, because I can, move around from here to there and get further away from the microphone and get closer to the microphone. And I can talk by modulating my voice level. So having read some of those, and we'll get back to some of those a little bit later. So I was asked by some people, we were having a discussion in after hours, to first describe what dynamics is not. Okay, it can be to dispel some misinformation or some misunderstandings. So the first thing is improper interfacing between devices. So if you have a line level output from one device and you're going into the next device into a mic level input, and you find that you're running your fader or volume control very, very low in its travel, in its range, where a very, very small, like 1 millimeter adjustment could produce a 6 to 10 dB change in output, that's not dynamics, that's improper interfacing. Another one is improper gain structure, which is related to what I just talked about. But if you have, if you find that you're running your channel faders or your output faders very high in its travel or very low in its travel, you're going to find that very, very small adjustments make a huge difference in the output. And you'll also find that changes in volume level could have outsized effects. So that's gain structure. That's not, it may affect the dynamics of the program, but dynamics processing is not going to fix that. So what is dynamics? What does it relate to? So yes, the textbook definition is the difference in the maximum versus minimum volume in your program. This also relates to the signal to noise ratio of the medium that the audience is listening to. So in electronic transmission, such as television, webcasting, there's a fairly wide dynamic range because it has a very low noise floor, such as we have here in office hours. When we are in a room with a PA system, it will relate to the room noise level because the minimum dynamic range is related to what is the noise floor in the room, right? And for intelligibility purposes, you want the minimum volume of your speech to be 10 dB over the room noise in order for speech to be intelligible. Also relates to the reverberation time in the room, the decay time in the room. If it's a very reverberant space, that effectively raises the noise floor of the room and will definitely affect intelligibility unless you can find a way to get your signal above the noise floor.
Nice.
Dynamics also relates to the spaces in between the words and the notes of music, which is also related to noise floor, but in between the notes, if you have a lot of space there, you hear more of the room tone, and that's part of dynamics. The file format that you're using, the bit depth of your file, will also affect what your total dynamic range will be, and your preamps will have a lot of effect on what your dynamic range will be. So all of this goes towards affecting the intelligibility of speech and the tone and quality of music and the articulation of music, the texture of the sounds, the consistency of the volume level, and here's an analogy. In video, we say that light level contrast equals interest, right? The parallel in audio would be dynamics. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Andy to talk about some of the tools that we have in our arsenal for controlling dynamics and determining what they are.
And just before Andy steps in, hang on just a second, Andy. I just want to let you know, all of you watching, we have an unbelievable panel of experts here. I was just looking at the panel, and I'm just kind of agog. So anybody on the panel who wants to weigh in, raise your hands in there. Andy is in that. So Andy, you can take it away from now. We'll come back to Mitch, and then anybody on the panel who has comments, raise your hand so I can know that you're in line for it. Andy, take it away.
Actually, Mitchell, you want to go first because your hand was up first?
It might be a good one to follow you, but I'll just mention it. I think there's also, dynamics are certainly important, but what you use to tame the dynamics or deal with them is another. And it's interesting because I come from a broadcast background that the things that I would use to affect dynamics in radio would be totally different than what you would use in a recording studio for a musician or a vocal booth for a voiceover guy. In radio, unfortunately, radio has made a bad name for itself. The only dynamic range in radio right now is about 3 dB because they're so loud. They're fighting the loudness wars, and I really am totally against that. But that also leaked into the way the record companies are mastering their songs. But I think I just want to point out that there are different applications for dealing with dynamics, and radio happens to be one of them.
There you go. Andy?
Yeah, and just to add to what Marty was just saying earlier about the context of why we use dynamics, there's one other thing, and he touched on this a little bit, but there are artistic reasons and creative reasons for also using dynamics. For example, you can bring out the breathiness of a voice with the proper use of dynamics. We hear that all the time in pop music, for example, or in very intimate Billie Eilish, when she's really singing very softly. There's a lot going on there with dynamics in order to bring that out. Marty's going to play something later on that will actually highlight some of this too. So just keep that in the back of your mind. It's not all technical. So the thing I'm going to get into here is just a very brief list of what kinds of dynamic processors are there. And this, by the way, goes back to the analog days, and we have the analog equivalents in digital consoles today. The one that probably everybody is most familiar with is a compressor. And then you also hear compressor limiter in the same breath often. A limiter is something, it's very similar to a compressor, but it is used for different purposes generally. A de-esser is a type of dynamics processor. We're not going to get into the details of all these things today. That'll probably be in a later show. But let me just focus on the other ones. An automatic gain control circuit, AGC, which is sometimes a button on a mixer or whatever, that's a type of dynamics processor. It's bringing up the low-level stuff and squashing down the high-level stuff and trying to keep your level within a good range. That's a type of dynamics processor. Arguably an auto mixer, like the Dugan, or the one that's on a Behringer X32 or some of the other Behringer products, is a dynamics processor, although it is doing things with level only, really. But it is sometimes using a type of gating circuit or to achieve this. So we might throw that also in there. There are a few others that are less common, but those are the big ones. We're going to get in a moment, we're going to get into just showing basic setup for a compressor, a good starting place for a compressor, and how to achieve that. Before we get into that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Francis, who's just going to talk about all the parameters of a compressor.
Take it away, Jeff.
So to categorize, I think about audio effects as changing various things. So if we think about faders, mic preamp gains, all of that stuff, that just changes level, and it changes level independent of the sound that's going through it. If you turn the fader up plus 10 dB, everything gets 10 dB louder. Then you get equalizers, which are frequency-dependent levels. So we're going to boost the high frequencies, reduce the low frequencies. A dynamics processor is a level-dependent level change. So it looks at the level of the sound going through it, and it makes adjustments based on the level. We split compressors, limiters, expanders, gates in half. There's the things that make less dynamic range, less contrast between the louds and the softs. Those are compressors and limiters. So they compress the dynamic range or they limit the dynamic range. And then there's the other half, which are expanders and gates. Expanders and gates make the dynamic range, the difference between louds and softs, greater. How do these work? They all work by turning something down. Compressors turn down louds, and expanders turn down quiets. So in an expander, the loud stuff stays the same, the medium stuff stays the same, and the quiet stuff gets quieter. In a compressor, the quiet stuff stays the same, the medium stuff stays the same, and the loud stuff gets quieter. Well, the first thing about this as a control, there's 4 basic controls, which are threshold, ratio, and then the attack times of attack and release, or the timing of attack and release. The threshold is simply a level decision. It's the choice where the compressor begins to work. So when we talk about compressing and limiting, if the sound level coming through the compressor is quieter than the threshold, nothing happens. It doesn't get changed. But if it gets above the threshold, then we begin to affect some gain reduction. So you'll commonly see this gain transfer curve. So this is showing a very simple compressor here, and the dashed line that goes from the bottom left to the top right is a 1-to-1. Whatever comes in goes out, no change. That's unity gain. That's absolutely no change to the audio. And you see that everything quiet on the low side of this is coming through unchanged. And then once you get to that point where the graph turns, that's the threshold, and the stuff above that gets quieter. Well, how much quieter is a thing that is the ratio? So there you see a couple of different ratios. So you see a different tilt to that. And so if you kind of imagine, if you've got a rubber band and you're stretching it, at some point the rubber band is loose and it doesn't resist you at all. And then when you get up to the threshold, it begins to resist, and the harder you pull, the more resistance is. If you have a tighter rubber band, you have a higher compression ratio. And then there's also how fast does the device actually apply the amount of gain reduction. So you can think of this as an automated fader. There's a little mouse in there inside the box who's got his hand on the fader. He's listening to your music, and when it gets loud, he pulls the fader down, and when it gets quiet again, he pushes back up. Well, how fast does that mouse react? I know it should be AI now, but I like to imagine a mouse inside my compressor with his hand on the fader, much faster than I ever could. And then if you get into, let me go back a slide here or two, if I can. When we get into the compression ratio, you can see that sometimes there it is. We get a thing called knee. So the red graph goes straight up as a 1-to-1 and then immediately flips over to the compression ratio. And then the soft knee shows you a curve, which means instead of going directly from a 1-to-1 to a 4-to-1 or 1-to-1 to 10-to-1, it goes 1-to-1 to 2-to-1 to 3-to-1 to 4-to-1. So it gradually goes into that.
Nice. Are we coming back, Andy? Are you grabbing it here, or are we going somewhere else? Oops, I'm not hearing you. You must still be muted. I see that you've got something up that you're feeding. There you go. No problem.
Yeah, so can you guys see my screen?
I can, yes.
Great, okay. So yeah, we're going to, here, let me just actually get my mic to stay on here. Give me 1 second. Sorry about this.
And it'll probably be easy for me, guys. If anybody wants to weigh in on any of these, just raise a hand here and I'll make sure I get to you.
Sorry about that. I couldn't unmute properly. So give me 1 second here and I'll get this set up.
Sure, absolutely.
This will just take a second.
And for those of you who are in the question system in Mukana or something like that, again, you have access to an astonishing array of decades, maybe way more than decades of audio experience here on the panel today. So if there's anything that's been bugging you about this topic, or we'll sneak in, if it's really critical, we'll sneak in something else. We'd like to keep as much as we can to the topics of dynamics processing. But if you have other questions, toss them in. We'll see what happens, and then we just want to make sure that we don't waste.
I will say, Bill, while
talent.
we're waiting for Andy to get set up. So learning faders and mic preamp gains, you have one control, and it affects one thing. Then you move to equalizers, and you now have generally three controls: center frequency, bandwidth, and booster cut. But those three controls essentially work independently from each other. So if I set an EQ with a plus 60 dB boost at 2 kilohertz and I move it to 1 kilohertz, I can hear that change, and that's the only thing that's been affected. Is now I'm boosting frequencies I'm boosting at a different frequency. The four main parameters of a dynamics processor, which is the threshold, the level at which it decides to make changes, the ratio, which is how strong of a change that is, the attack time, how fast does it initiate that attenuation change, that gain reduction, and the release, which is the timing of once the signal falls back below the threshold, how quickly does it return back to unity gain to no change. All four of those interact with each other quite dramatically. That if the attack time is really long, a loud transient, a very short loud sound like hitting a snare drum, can come through the compressor before the compressor has any chance, because it has a slow attack time, before it has any chance to actually reduce the gain. So a missetting of one of those four parameters doesn't allow you to set the other ones or hear even the effects of the other ones. So learning dynamics processors is exponentially more complex than learning equalization, because the controls interact with each other. And I've only talked about the four primary controls. We'll get into a couple other ones like knee. And then when we talk about expanders and gates, sometimes we allow them to stay in their open position. So there's an additional hold time. And then at the end of it all, we have, since we're doing attenuation, we usually want to turn things up. So there is a makeup gain at the end of these things.
Is it fair to say that the more... Oh, go ahead. Continue.
I will say that the most important thing that we always look at when working with dynamics processors is an additional meter, and that meter is the gain reduction meter. It shows us how much attenuation is taking place at any given time. And by observing that, we can see how much dynamics processing is taking place.
Speaking of
Is it fair to say that the more experience you get, the more control you want to have? I always think of things like AGC you mentioned before, or Andy mentioned. To me, that is like, I want to stay away from it, because I first encountered it on small devices, and if you punched in AGC, the background went nuts when people stopped talking and things like that. I didn't want it automated. I wanted to control it. Is it fair to say that the more advanced you get, the more granular control you want to have?
Yes, and I think also the more you begin to hear compression, the less you use it. You get much more subtle with its use, because you begin to hear how it really can suck the life out of performances.
At first, it's just saying, it's forward, and I can hear that, and now, and I love it, and I'm going to turn it up. I put heavy compression or heavy limiting, and we've mentioned, we haven't really gone into, but we've mentioned the loudness wars. It's like the old thing of typing in all caps. If you're shouting on the internet, if everything is loud, then there's no dynamic contrast, and we've lost the beauty of music. We've lost the cadence of speech. We need silence. We need some breath. We need a place to breathe in between. And I think Andy's ready now. Andy, is your demo ready?
I'm ready, as long as you can see my shared screen. Can you switch?
It's on one of my... There it is. Now I see it in the panel.
All right.
Yes. Good.
So great. So what we're looking at here is a Yamaha QL1. I'm actually using the iPad software just because the graphics on it are better. It'll be easier for everybody to see what's going on here. And you see actually literally my mic. I have a lav mic on right now. That's why it sounds like I might be a little thin. But that's on the channel 1 there. And on channel 2, we have tone. We are going to use tone as a tool today to look at compression. And we'll also listen to a mic as well. But tone is a great tool. I used to use it all the time before digital consoles when we had knobs on compressors and things to make adjustments before I actually even turned a mic on. So we're actually going to do that right now. So I'm going to turn this tone on. And you might hear it a little bit in the background. That's on purpose because I don't want to kill everybody with the level. I'm going to adjust this level a little bit. I'm going to bring it up about 10 dB here. So actually, if you notice, that tone level is pretty close to my mic's gain level. By the way, this is the input gain I just adjust. It's just on faders instead of knobs. So believe me when I say these two levels, the mic and the tone, are pretty close together right at the moment. Mic looks like it's a little hotter, but not a big deal right now.
And Andy, I just want to jump in here a second and just ask if you have, is original sound for you on?
Oh, let me double check. Are you hearing the tone? Because it should have stayed on.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Yeah, a little bit, but to get the nuances, I think.
Yeah, no, I actually turned on original sound when I was doing my testing, as long as when they moved me into this room, I don't even know how to look at that at the moment. I don't think I can look at it while I'm in a shared screen. Or can I? I don't know. Let me see. Hold on one second.
It's under the View Options menu.
Yeah, I'm looking here. Where is it? I'm pretty sure it's on. You wouldn't hear the tone. You'd hear the tone cutting in and out. If you're not hearing the tone cutting in and out, it's still on.
It's not. It's constant.
Good. Okay. I'm gonna assume it's on because I can't find it. All right. So moving on, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the dynamics on this tone channel. So what I need to do is actually get to that view. Sorry, that's not the right view. Hold on 1 second here. There we go. Okay. So here's tone. You can see this is the label, the channel label down here in tone. What we're looking at here on the left side is the gate. We're not using the gate. We're going to use the right side of this screen, the compressor. And right now it's not on. So let's turn on the dynamics channel, this dynamics processor in here. And let's look at this for a second, because Jeff was just describing all these parameters. So the first thing to notice is there's an in and an out meter. This in meter is literally the gain of this channel. I just adjusted the gain on that tone. That's that right there. That's what's feeding into the compressor. The out is what's coming out of the compressor. And if you have to think of this thing as being inserted in the path of this channel. Okay? So right now, this compressor is doing absolutely nothing. Whatever we're feeding in is coming out, same level. You can see it right there. It's very important to note at this point that gain structure has a big effect on your compressor. When you're setting up a compressor, do the gain first. Get your channel where you want it to sit. On this console, the Behringers as well, it's typically around -18 dB full scale. That's where, incidentally, that's where this transitions from a green to a yellow light. That's a good place for your microphone level. In this case, we're using tone. Okay. So all I'm going to do is actually Jeff referred to this earlier. When you start using compression more, you tend to use it more subtly. So we're going to do some subtle compression on this channel. I'm going to do a little 4:1. Actually, I can't. There we go. So I'm going to bring the ratio down to 4:1. And by the way, there's the ratio, threshold, attack, release, output gain, also known as makeup gain. Here's knee. He referred to some of these earlier. So I just brought the ratio down to 4:1. Nothing happened. So nothing happened because our threshold is still up at 0. So I'm going to gradually bring this threshold down, and you will see this red meter down here increase, and that's when we're going to start to see some gain reduction. So I'll bring that down. I like to do for microphones, just like get 3 or 4 of these little LED lights to light up. So right now we're right about, I'll go a little there. There we go. So now we got a little bit of gain reduction here, and you will see that reflected in the output meter. The output meter went down a few dB. If I go down even more in the threshold, I can even get this gain to almost completely go away. It's still there, but it's very faint. So let's put it back where it was. Okay, that's a good starting point. So now I've got this going on. Now I could leave it there and I'd have a compression setting. Now, for me, what I want to do is I want to bring the output gain back up to where it was because I have lost some dBs. So the compressor is taking off the attack of this. I'm going to bring up this output gain, otherwise known as makeup gain, which is, I think, a better word for it. So we're going to bring that up. So now I'm compressing. I am. And you don't hear it because it's tone, by the way. But I have now achieved some compression without changing my overall level. Now, let's apply this to a microphone, and then you'll see what's going on. So I'm literally going to copy these settings. I just copied them. And I'm going to turn off our tone, so we don't have to hear that. And I'm going to switch over to our lav channel. So there's our lav channel. This is my microphone that I'm talking into right now. The dynamics is off. I'll just turn it on. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to paste these into this channel. And I'm going to do it. And as I do it, I'm going to talk. And you might hear a little difference. So here we go. I'm going to just keep talking. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I just pasted them in. You might have heard a little change. I mean, what I hear is I hear a little bit of the noise floor going up. That makes perfect sense because I'm adding about 4.5 dB a gain here. I also might make some further adjustments because the voice and tone are a little different. So it looks like I'm squishing this a little bit more than I want. I want my 2 or 3 lights, maybe my 4 lights to light up. So I'll back off the threshold a little bit. The output makeup gain might need to be adjusted just a smidge, not too much. There, that's a good starting point. And if I really lean into this, it'll catch my peaks. If I want to smash this more, here I'll bring the threshold down. I can really make myself kind of go away there a lot. Yeah, there you go. So that is compression 101 in a nutshell.
Cool. Marty, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so yes, that's a really good demonstration of how compression works on a basic level and what its effect was. So what I was hearing, Andy, when you applied the compression to your microphone is that at the peak volume of your voice modulation, those words that were in the parts of words that were particularly accentuated, I was hearing them being reduced, actively reduced, sort of like ducking almost. And that, when you hear that kind of effect, that is kind of undesirable, which is why you lightened up on the threshold and sounded much more natural. At the same time, it was controlling the peaks of your voice so that it didn't overmodulate. It also had the effect of bringing up slightly, because of the makeup gain, bringing up the lowest parts of your vocal speech, where you might relax your voice a little bit. It brought them up, and so the range of volume in your voice was actually narrowed, and that makes it more consistent to the receivers, to the audience, and makes it a little bit more intelligible.
Yeah, if I could add one thing too, is that you know, a lot of people, I see this all the time. We all see this all the time. People have got their nice big Shure SM7s, you know, and they get that big radio sound when they're doing podcasts or they're doing Zoom calls and things like that. And things are just I hear a lot of over compression. And the reason to use light compression is you will maintain I think you will maintain your audience's interest. If the dynamic level is just doing this a little bit, your dynamic range is just in a very narrow area, everything can start to sound the equivalent of monotone. Whereas if you don't overdo the compression and you do leave a bigger dynamic range, there's more range in that. The soft, when I'm talking softly, and when I'm talking loudly, your listener will hear that, and psychoacoustically, and I think it maintains more interest, and you get less hearing fatigue from your listener.
Yeah, it's one thing to have compression on a 30-second spot's going to come and go. It's another thing to have it on a 2-hour program where you're just constantly at the same level.
Exactly.
Jeff, did you have a comment before we get to our questions? We've got a good group of questions coming up. Jeff?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to show kind of like a basic overview, another look at it. So here's just an audio waveform. And I've circled there where you can see, so we have this is positive and negative, audio waveform. And you can see the threshold there as the red dashed line. And you see some things go above it, and those are the things that are going to be affected. Also pay attention to where sort of quiet audio is, because we're going to see that change as we go. So then once compression happens, those peaks get turned down. So you see that most of the stuff above the threshold has been reduced, so that's been reduced, but this quiet stuff is still in the same place. And then the next thing that usually happens is makeup gain. So as Andy did in his demo, we turn this entire signal up. And so now the entire signal comes up. And so the peaks have moved up to that peak, but now the quieter stuff has gotten louder. So people think of compression as making quiet sounds louder. What we're really doing is making loud stuff quieter and then turning everything up. What we're doing overall is reducing the peak to average difference. So our louds are not so much louder than our quiets.
Nice. Marty, you want to comment?
Before we get to questions, is we talk about compressor as a way to control dynamics, but expanders are an equally important tool to use. And I want to demonstrate that here I'm going to demonstrate using the microphone I have right now. And I'm actually in a fairly noisy environment. I have several PCs around me. One of them is kind of noisy because the liquid CPU cooler is failing, and so it rattles a little bit. But when I stop talking, you don't hear it. Now I'm going to turn original sound on so that you can hear this a little bit more. And what you're looking at is my noise gate, or my expander, the expander that I'm applying on my microphone channel. And what it's doing is it's actually quieting the environment between my speech and words and phrases. So if I turn this off right now, you can hear the noise floor in my room pretty well, right? When I turn it on, you see right here that, can you see my cursor, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see the noise reduction meter working between my phrases. And you can see that when it's quieting down. Now, interestingly enough, when we apply, if I were to apply compression to this, as well as makeup gain, this is going to actually bring up the noise floor. So let me do that. And so you can see here, now the red bar is gain reduction that's being applied by the compressor. And you can hear the noise floor came way up because of the makeup gain. And so these two processors play off of each other, and you've got to be careful sometimes how you use them. And we will apply this in live situations. Like I will go into to do an event where I may have several people on stage sitting in comfy chairs, each wearing a lavalier microphone, and the air conditioning noise in the room is quite high, right? And so I need to apply expanders to reduce the noise that the microphones are picking up when people are actually not speaking.
Nice. We do have a group of questions that are coming in, so let me just double check. Oh, I'm sorry. Mickey wanted to get in on this before we go to questions. Mickey.
Yeah, I just wanted to perhaps show as well a visual representation of what happens to a waveform that's being compressed. So I have a simple recording here, and this is just Pro Tools. Let me zoom in on the waveform here. So let me play back a raw recording for you.
This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID.
So that is the raw recording. What I have here are two channels that have been, two copies of the same thing that have been compressed differently. This one being compressed fairly lightly. Let me zoom in on this compressor here. So this is the sound of this same recording, but compressed fairly lightly, just a 1.5 ratio on it.
This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID. This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID.
While this one is, again, the same recording, but compressed fairly heavily. And what we see here is the amount of gain reduction that's happening on the channel.
This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID. This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID.
So you can see from the waveforms here, this is the raw one. This one compressed lightly, and this one compressed very heavily. You can see the compressor acting on it and reducing the levels of the higher, of the louder portions of the recording. Now let me zoom in on, I have the same tracks here with the compressor printed on it, but leveled out to the same loudness, so that our perceived loudness of how we're hearing them is the same. And we can take a look at, say, compare the raw. This is the same portion here between the three versions. Let me highlight all of them, and we can see on the heavily compressed one, this quiet portion is now significantly louder compared to the same section in the raw. And this is, I believe, an S or an X.
Alex Lindsay.
So that's it. That's him saying the X in Alex Lindsay. So let me play the raw, the lightly compressed, and the heavily compressed one, leveled out to the same loudness, one after the other.
This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID.
And this is the lightly compressed.
This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID.
And this is the heavily compressed.
This is Alex Lindsay, and this is the Office Hours 5.1 channel ID.
So you can hear there different amounts of compression: zero compression, light compression, and also very heavy compression.
Nice demo. It was clear. I'm wearing headphones, and it was the difference in the tonality of them, and I can see why that for a brief period of time, none of them would bother me. And in fact, the heavily compressed one might kind of be a little more in my face. But over the course of a long program or something like that, overcompression would probably end up being fatiguing. And it would just kind of make me think, is there something else I should be doing now? Because I'm tired of this in-my-face sound for long periods of time. Let's dive into our questions. We've only got about 15 minutes left of the show. So, Mitch, what do we got?
First in, Danny Grizzle from Longview, Texas. How should the approach to dynamics and sound reinforcement, live sound, differ from dynamics and recording media creation?
Marty's going to help us out. Marty?
Absolutely. So depending on your environment and the type of program and the place you're in, and whether you're in a live environment with an active PA system, or you're electronic for webcasting or recording, each of these have different dynamic range capabilities and limitations and things that will affect them. So in a live PA situation where you have active speakers, you have room noise, you have maximum volume level, you have feedback, you have leakage from one microphone to another microphone. All of these things will affect how you apply dynamics processing and what your goal is for those dynamics processing. If you are completely electronic and you're in a quiet environment like a recording studio or at a good desktop or in a studio, a television studio. Then you have a wider dynamic range for your environment, for your microphones to pick up. And you also need to think about what your storage medium is, what your transmission medium is. As we talked about earlier, if you're doing AM or FM radio, that transmission channel is inherently quite noisy. And so you want to be well above the noise floor. And also in AM and FM radio, the level that you're putting out will affect how far your signal will travel in terms of range. If you are doing television or cable television, then your dynamic range is wider in that transmission channel. If you are recording classical or jazz music or performing live, classical and jazz music inherently has a very wide dynamic range. If you have an orchestra on stage, you might have one piccolo that is playing a part of a song. And then I'm thinking of like the 1812 overture, right? There'd be one piccolo just playing solo, and then you get the full orchestra with timpani, drums, and live cannon shots, and the volume range there is absolutely incredibly wide. Rock and blues music has a narrower dynamic range. It's typically compressed fairly well. And then webcasting depends on the platform. Every webcam, YouTube, Spotify, they all have their own specifications and dynamics.
Let's move through. We've got 3 more people on this, and now questions are pouring in, as I suspected. So many people are interested in audio. Andy, take on the next piece.
Yeah, just real quickly. So basically what Marty said, but also, look, in a recording studio, you're in a quiet room. You've got lots of soundproofing and all that, and on a stage, practically, who knows what's going on there. So to add to what Marty said, from a practical standpoint, in the live world, which is what I typically work in, like the demo I just did earlier, where I added compression and I added makeup gain. If we were on a noisy stage where there were a lot of fans, a lot of times you have lighting, especially in theater where there's like 100 moving lights. Everyone has a fan. The background noise comes up. That adjusting the mic the way I did would bring all that up. So there are artifacts. Bleed is a big deal when you're actually using makeup gain and a compressor. I'm not saying don't do that. In fact, there are other tools to help you manage noise that bleeds into your mics that we're not going to get into in this discussion. But those are things to be aware of to the point of this question.
Mickey?
With sound reinforcement and to an extent also theatrical exhibitions of films, there's not much in terms of, say, regulation in terms of the dynamic range within your mix. That's a different story when it comes to, say, broadcast, where you have very strict rules wherein you must hit this loudness level or RMS level while maintaining this specific true peak of your mix. Say, for example, in a narrative film in the theatrical mix, going back to what I let you guys listen earlier with voice, with compressing a voice, in a sound reinforcement mix, you're not tied to using dynamics processing specifically for technical reasons to hit those target loudness levels. You are more inclined to use dynamics processing for creative reasons, as Andy mentioned earlier, like compressing a voice or some element in the mix could give you, at least psychologically, a thicker, maybe more prominent and more present sound within the overall mix. Say, for example, a kick drum. A kick drum is a very dynamic sound source, and if you want your kick drum to sound a bit more thicker or like some people say fatter, you'd want to bring out the resonance and bring the resonance, the very quiet resonance, much closer in loudness to the initial transient of the beater hitting the skin. So you could use compression there to bring that transient down lower, and then use your makeup gain to bring the entire impulse louder, resulting with a much more prominent and present sound within the overall mix.
Thanks.
With
I don't want to
say.
Yeah,
and
I'm just
real
getting
quick,
worried here. We've been on this about 5. Go ahead and finish up, Mickey, and then I want to get to Marty and Jeff real quick, and then we're going to move on. So I got a lot of questions.
Say with a TV show, say an unscripted reality show, where people are competing against each other. When I'm mixing that type of show, I typically have a hierarchy of dialogue. People have, like, say, the actual dialogue while they're competing. I give them a certain amount of compression so that they sit nicely, but the host, I will compress the host a bit more, so that in terms of the hierarchy of dialogue, the host ends up being more prominent, more present, and I guess dominant in the mix. But on top of that, the interviews, the sit-down interviews, say in the tribal council where people, vote other people off, I would compress the sit-down interviews even more, because the sit-down interviews are what act as the storytelling device within a competitive reality show like that.
Fascinating. Marty, real quick. Oops, you're muted, Marty.
Okay, so actually I want to play a musical passage, and I want to play it twice, and it's going to be 60 seconds for each one. And I'm going to show this here.
Okay, just realize we're probably going to lose 2 or 3 questions to doing that because we got a bunch here. So, but go ahead.
All right, so this is a passage that I think is really, really exemplifies the capabilities of dynamic range. And I'm going to play it first uncompressed, and then I'm going to compress it, and we can see the difference.
We're not hearing anything back at this point. Yeah, again, I'm hearing nothing.
Okay, then let's move on. Go ahead and move on.
Okay. Jeff, you had a quick note before we get to the next question?
Yeah, I was just going to play on what Mickey said to show you how complex compression is. Mickey was talking about a kick drum, which has a transient loud attack and then a quieter resonant ring. And he talked about using compression to reduce that attack and raise the resonance. A different setting on the compressor could let the attack through unchanged and then reduce the resonance just by changing the attack and release times and the threshold and ratio. And now you would do the exact opposite to that kick drum. You would increase the difference between the attack and the resonance. So same device, same instrument, different settings, and completely different result.
Cool. Next question.
Next question for Jack Rupel in Breckenridge, Colorado. Lost in the radio and television commercials sound wars?
Jeff, real quick, and Mitch, and then Jeff Cohen.
Okay, so the loudness wars, trying to make everything loud. It's competing. I think of this from the music world, that through I have a image here. This is the average level of songs, popular songs over 30 years from 1979 to 2009. And you see that the average level of those songs on CD has gone up over that time. This was the loudness wars. The idea was, if I want my mix to be louder than last year's hit. And how do you make it louder? You bring up the average level because the peak is limited by digital. Well, thankfully, we are moving away from that with LUFS and with automatic loudness compensation playback. So YouTube and other streaming services, Apple Music, Spotify, all of those, they set everything to be the same average loudness level rather than keeping all the peaks the same. So competing in this loudness war actually loses out. And kind of the turning point was Metallica's Death Magnetic. People actually found it sounded better on Guitar Hero because they went back to the stems. It was not the fully mastered version. And so people are like, why does Metallica Death Magnetic sound better on a Guitar Hero video game than it does on the release? It's because they over-compressed, over-limited the master in the CD release.
Mitchell.
Radio and TV are restricted to very specific specifications, how loud they can go, not loud, how high their volume can go or how high their modulation can go. And the NAB, since digital came along, came in and said, minus 23 LUFS is the limit we'd like to see you at. So what television commercials that wanted to be loud started adjusting the loudness, which is basically the RMS to the peak level. And the closer they could get the RMS up there, the more annoyingly loud it got. That was the psychoacoustical loudness that we were forced to listen to as far as radio and commercials. And in the old days on AM, the audio was half of the power that was going out to the transmitter. So the more audio the more audio you had, the more reach you had, and that's why they did it.
Jeff, can you do it in 10 seconds?
Yes, the internet doesn't follow that. Everyone has different standards. YouTube, Netflix, Spotify. YouTube does an interesting thing to fix it. If you're too hot, they'll crank you down. They won't bring you back up. So you want to try and hit those target levels. Look at Stats for Nerds on YouTube, and you'll see what they've done to every single YouTube video. Very interesting.
Let's go to the next question.
And it's a question for me. What are your favorite song recordings that you use to evaluate dynamics being applied?
Can everybody give me 15 seconds? And we'll start with Jeff Francis.
One of mine is Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. It is a 2-mic recording. So it is 2 microphones into preamps, and that was it. So it's no dynamics processing, and so you can hear the orchestra as it existed.
Cool. Mitchell.
For dynamics, Benny and the Jets from Elton John, to hear it punching holes because it's very heavy bass quality. And for just general sound quality, so I can hear everything, IGY, Donald Fagen.
Marty, what's your favorite?
Yeah, Donald Fagen is great. Supertramp's Breakfast in America. But more importantly, things that I've recorded myself because I know what they sound like.
There you go. You have an absolute reference because you were there when they were recorded. Next question.
Jack Ruppel from Breckenridge, Colorado. Positional dynamics with 32-bit float and second-order ambisonics.
This sounds complicated. Andrew, can you break it down for us simply?
I don't know what he's asking, but I wanted to put a plug in for the post show that if we don't get to all your questions, we can do it in the post show. And also, like Marty, I also have a Behringer X32 screen and my mic going through it and all that if we want to play later on.
Very cool. After Hours is a great source for this. And, I'm trying to get through. I just want to, such great questions and such great expertise here that I've been trying to push you alone. And I'm sorry about that. A lot of these answers deserve far more time than we're able to give them. Let's sneak one more in if we can.
It's from Douglas Carmichael. When would you sidechain an entire music mix to the kick or other rhythmic element?
Ooh, interesting question. Jeff Francis, help us out.
So come back for later installments of dynamics when we talk about sidechaining, but this would basically reduce the mix every time the kick hit so that you could actually make the kick stand out a little bit more. It's a way to deal with dense mixes to let elements. It's kind of an automated mixing technique.
Very nice. We can sneak one more in. Let's go ahead. Next question.
Next one in from Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany. I once saw a graphical meter running on a PC looking like a colorful carpet wandering from bottom to top while analyzing audio. Can you please explain what that is all about?
Jeff Francis.
I'm guessing that was either one of two things. It was either a spectrograph display, which is displaying energy per frequency, or it could also be there are a couple of dynamic meters that show you a level histogram of audio levels.
Cool. We're going to have to sneak out into office hours after hours. Remember, it's there 24/7. I know a lot of these people will probably be hanging out over there who will be able to get more into detail. A couple of quick announcements before we finish up. Thursday, November 30th. Don't forget the EVS show, Playback and Recording Workflow. Robert Green is going to be our special guest. That is tomorrow on the show in our second hour. The Squares TV application tonight with Michael Forrest. That's at 11 a.m., so 2 hours after the show finishes today. The Isadora Lab is tomorrow at 11 a.m., so those of you who are learning that, thanks so much for everybody being here. Let's see our Talk Traversal today. We managed to cover 87,492 miles. That's 140,805 kilometers, or more than 692 million bananas laid end to end. That's how far we travel to get you the answers to your questions today. We will do the same thing tomorrow. I am appreciative of everybody who came today. We have to thank the panelists. You guys are amazing. There is so much collected wisdom here, and people come and share it freely every day. That is what makes office hours work. So thank you to those of you who ask questions, to our audience, to our producers. We call you producers because really you drive the show with your questions. Thank you so much for all your hard work. And the back end, usually unsung, although we have Mickey sneaking in today, who is often in the back end doing one of these jobs and helping everybody hear this show better than anyone can imagine possible. But for everybody who works behind the scenes in the back end, thank you so much for all of your effort. We truly appreciate it. I'm going to get out of your way and we'll let the credits roll. Thank you for listening and watching.
And I think Squares is 10 a.m. Pacific, if I'm not mistaken. 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. for those of us that are on the East Coast. Mine says 11 a.m. Pacific, so I might be wrong. I grabbed this off the website, so pay attention to whether it's 10 or 11. Today's email says 10 a.m., so just
okay, good.
Tune in at 10 a.m. Pacific and just stay there until something shows up.
That's right. Bring a cup of coffee and relax, and it'll happen either at 10 or 11, probably at 10.
If my dynamics are set up well for whispering in the post-show, I think I need to tweak them.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today. Truly appreciate it. I got to sneak out. I got to go travel.